Well, we're on our last week of our 3-week series through our mission and vision, our Vision Refresh series. And so we are talking about, we've done Reach the Lost, we've done Restore the Wanderer, and now we are going to be talking about readying the church. And I don't know if everybody's aware of this or not. Who is aware of the rapture disaster of 2025 this past year? Has anybody heard about that? Okay, there's a couple of us. So I don't, if you haven't heard, that's okay. I'll fill you in. You didn't miss it. We weren't raptured, all right? We're all still here, so you didn't miss something. If I had come out and said, you missed it, no, we all left. No, so there was a few weeks ago, and it kind of, it coincided around the Charlie Kirk shooting. It was when a lot of things were pretty tense. There was a man, I don't know if he's a pastor or not, but there was a man in South Africa, because you got to watch those South Africans. You never know what they're up to, but no, there was a gentleman from South Africa who started making videos online talking about how he had figured out, he had done the math, and he had heard from God that he knew when the rapture was going to be happening. So he was certain that he knew the date and he knew the time, and that he was going to, he wanted everybody to be ready. He wanted everybody to be prepared because the rapture was coming and he knew when it was happening. And so Christians should know this. Here's a cheat code for you, church Christian. If you ever hear somebody tell you that they know what day the rapture is going to happen or what day Jesus is going to come back, you can be 100% certain it will not happen on that day, okay? Because the Bible tells us we do not know the day or the hour when Christ will return. And so if somebody claims to know, they don't. But this caught fire. It only reason I heard about it is because it actually transcended into, I didn't hear about it from another pastor or another Christian person. It actually got into the secular world, and there was a podcast that I enjoy listening to. It's not even a Christian podcast, it's a sports podcast that joked about, hey, are we going to be raptured today? And I said, why is this guy is not a Christian? Where did he hear the word rapture? And so I had to go looking and searching, and that made me realize, oh, okay, that when I started looking into things and hearing these things, then all of a sudden that was where I was like, okay, this is pretty crazy. But it took over. There were people, he had a group of people who were very certain that this was going to happen, and we're telling people to be ready. And the sad thing about this is not that this is unique. This has happened before. In my lifetime, I know of 2 or 3 other times where things like this have caught fire, and people have been caught in by this. And there's one thing when we're talking about readying the church, there's one thing about being ready, and then there's another thing about when you're ready for something that's not really going to happen. And the problem with this is that it turned into this thing where people started and have been used to say, hey, let's get ready for this. You need to start, selling your possessions. You need to start, and it really starts affecting people's lives because they really believe that this is something that's about to happen. And so when we're talking about readying the church, we need to be ready in the right way. We need to be ready for what the Bible actually tells us to be ready for. Not for something because it's easy. And in this, we're going to get a little bit into and talk about a little bit about what's going to happen future, when we're looking towards the future, when we're looking towards, the eternal kingdom, and when Jesus is going, because those are things that are going to come back. Jesus is going to come back one day. But as we're getting ready for that, how we're doing it, and what we're doing as we're getting ready matters. And not so much, we're talking a little bit about the future, but we're also talking about how are we ready right now? How are we ready as a church right here today in the time and place that God has given us for here and now? How are we being a ready church? And so our key idea that I want us to look at for this morning, if you don't mind flipping that slide for me, Bob, to be an obedient church, we must be a ready church. To be an obedient church, we must be a ready church. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning, is that how are we as Pathway, as individuals in this room, how are we being obedient to what God has called us to do? And how is that, as we seek to be obedient to Him, how does that coincide with also making us ready for what he has for us and for what the future holds for us and for our country, for our city, for this world as a whole. So before we do that, we need to understand, before I want to dive in, we're going to talk about two things in this statement, ready the church. We're going to talk about the church, and we're going to talk about being ready. So first, I want to talk about the church. Make sure we understand what we are. So what is the church? What is the church? If we're going to be a ready church, what is it? What is the church, and what does it mean to be ready? So the church is God's plan for his people. The church is God's plan for his people. Jesus Christ was the first person to speak about the church because he knew Jesus had this very specific season in time where he was here and he was walking on this earth and he was with his disciples and he was teaching them and he was showing them his plans and showing them his purposes in their lives. He was getting them ready because he knew that Jesus knew he was not going to be on this earth forever. He was not going to be here all the time in every moment. And his plan instead is once he left, that is when the church was going to pick up the mantle that he left behind. And so he says this is the first time, this is when Jesus is the one who introduces the concept of the church. In Matthew 16:18, he says, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Jesus introduces the church for the first time, and he does it with this verse right here. And this verse comes after he has asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples tell him, some people say a prophet, some people say Elijah, some people say a good teacher. They give them all these answers, and then he asks them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter is the first one to speak up, and he says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And he says that, and after he says that, this is when Jesus gives him this statement, "I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." There's so many great things in that verse, but if we could just remember, if you can always remember, church, that the gates of hell do not prevail against us. The gates of hell do not prevail against the church. That the church has been equipped and has been called and has been made ready by God to be the vehicle that fights this spiritual battle that we have in this world. That Satan and the enemy are still active and they're still seeking to move and accomplish their purposes, but they cannot prevail against the church. Jesus says that the gates of hell cannot prevail against us. He laid out that the church is God's plan for his people. And I want to make sure we understand this verse too, because this verse can get confusing when it says, he's talking to Peter and he's saying, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." So we have this misunderstanding of this passage, I believe to be a misunderstanding of this passage. When you go, the Catholic Church believes that this is the verse that gives basically the credence for why they have a pope within their church body and their congregation, because the pope is a direct descendant through all of these lines of Peter, the first pope, because of this verse, because they believe that Peter was the rock on which the church is built, that he somehow has, which I think is a misunderstanding, somehow an elevated status, that he was somehow elevated amongst the other disciples, that he was given some sort of status that other disciples weren't given, that he was given some place within the early church that was higher than the others. I would disagree with that. When I look at this passage, the understanding that I have here is, well, first off, what we seem to know from this passage is Jesus was making a play on words here. So the two words for rock and Peter in Greek are very close to each other. So Peter is Petros and rock is Petra. And so you don't understand that play on words unless you understand the Greek. But what he seems to be telling to Peter here, and what Peter actually ends up doing, what I think the most basic understanding in this passage is that Peter was a part of the very beginning of the church. It'd be crazy to say otherwise. Peter was an integral part of the church getting started, right? He was the disciple that pulled all the other disciples together. He was the one that was leading prayer when the Holy Spirit came down upon them. He was the one that delivered the very first of these powerful messages that saw people come to Christ. But what you never saw Peter doing was giving any of the glory to himself or ever acting like he was some sort of higher spiritual figure that could hear from God to speak to the other people. He always pointed people back to the true foundation and the true rock, which is Jesus. And he is the rock on which the church, the foundation of the church is Jesus and always will be Jesus Christ. He is the cornerstone. That declaration that Peter made had more to do with the foundation of the church than Peter does, which is you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's the foundation upon which the church is built, Jesus Christ. But Peter was a rock in that foundation. It'd be silly to deny his integral part in the beginning of the church. So was John, so was James, so was many others. But of course, people had an important role to play. Peter was one of them, but that doesn't elevate him beyond the others. But we do see that he had a part to play in bringing about God's plan for his people, which was the church. The second thing about what is the church? What is the church? The second thing is we are the church. We are the church. Us here in this room, you are the church. You are the church here. And I love, it's why even focusing on Missions Month, I think, is so important too. It's like hearing from Chris and Andrea, I just felt this connection. But they said it's been 8 or 9 years since they've been members at Pathway, but they are the church. They are, in one sense, an extension of us as Pathway and also of just the church as a whole, right? The church is the people. The church is the people, and it's made up of the people in this room. Look what Paul says in Acts 20, verse 28. Let me read it to you this morning. He says, "Pay careful attention to yourselves and to all the flock in which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Take care for the church of God, which he obtained with his blood." Take care of the church of God, which he obtained with his blood. These are Paul's last words to the elders at the church of Ephesus. So at the church of Ephesus, this is Paul right before he was about to go to Jerusalem, and when the end of his life was about to be started. He was going to go to Rome, and then he was eventually going to die for his faith. But he tells them to watch over the flock, take care of the church of God. When he says that, he's referring to the people. The church is the people. Wouldn't this be a weird thing? It would be a crazy thing to say, because this is how, when you say, and I'm not blaming, listen, we need to know this. It doesn't, and we need to teach people this, but it makes sense that our culture has come to identify church with building, right? It's like a church. If I ask about, Mark Mulliner and I were talking the other day, and we were talking about some of the Methodist churches that have had to close recently and gone up for sale. And when we're talking about, the Methodist church, we're thinking of the building. We weren't talking about the people. The people are still there. They're meeting in another congregation somewhere, with another group of people. They're still active. The people who were there are still a part of the church, but the building is now empty. And now you can still call it a church, but there's no people meeting in there. It's not the church anymore. That's not what Paul's saying here. He's not telling the Ephesian elders, take care of the church. Now, Jim, you make sure you sweep. Now, Terry, make sure you clean up the dishes. Now you take care of No, he's not talking about take care of the people. That's the church. The people gathered in this room, we are the church. You need to know that. You are the church. When we talk about the church and we talk about going to church on a Sunday, we are the church, and we're going to be with our other brothers and sisters who are the church. Church, if God ever, we don't know what time ever some of you have been at Pathway when it's been in a theater, when it's been in a middle school, when it's been in other different places. It didn't stop being a church depending on what building you were in. When you built this space and became a part of here, oh great, now we're a church, we got a building, this is awesome. No, you're the church. The building is great, the building is wonderful. I love not having to, when I interned at Pathway and had to carry sound equipment in every Sunday, it wasn't the best thing I had that going, I didn't love it, it wasn't great, but it was still the church. I'm thankful I don't have to do that anymore, but it's still the church because it's the people, not the building or the space. And then finally, what is the church? It's a local gathering. It's a local gathering of believers together. Because the church, even though the people are the church, we here are Pathway. We are the church at Pathway. And we have the opportunity to gather here, locally, here and now. And there's a church that's universal. We know that there is a church that's meeting all over the world. We know that there's a church that's meeting, David and Alicia have brothers and sisters still back in South Africa that are going to faithfully meet today. And they're the church. And they're gathering faithfully, locally, right where they're at. We get to gather here in Elmhurst, faithfully, locally with our people here. But the church is a local gathering together. In Hebrews 10, 24 and 25, it says, "Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting meeting together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." He's saying don't neglect getting together. Even though we are the church as people, we still need these local bodies to gather together, to encourage one another, to exhort one another, to challenge one another. We gather here locally because that's what they've done from the early church period. That's why we have a book of Colossians, a book of Ephesians, a book of Philippians. Those are all churches meeting in their local places, right where they're at, right where God has placed them. The church is a local gathering, and we should not, as Hebrews tells us, we should not neglect gathering together. We should not take one thing and make it mean something else, just because I've heard it said, and it's not right to say, well, I'm the church, which is true, so I don't need the local body. I don't need to gather. I don't need to do those things. I'm the church, so why do I need to go to church? It's because both are commands from Scripture. Just because one thing is true doesn't make the other thing not true. You need both, because that's what makes up the church. And if we know what the church is, then I just want to say to us real quickly also what the church isn't, just so we understand what the church isn't. Like I said before, it's not just a building. It's not a building or a space. When the Methodist Church had to move out of their building, they were still got the opportunity to be the church. If there are times, and I've had this happen with churches and other places that have had to move buildings or have had to downsize or go other places, it's not about the building. They're still the church. The church isn't an order of events, ministries, or programs. If you take away some of these things, that sometimes we just take for granted, if God bless the Moliners. I love that they bring fellowship time. I know we all love that we get snacks after church every Sunday sometimes. If a church doesn't have a coffee bar, if it doesn't have snacks, if it doesn't have these things, does it cease to be a church? No. If a church doesn't have a nursery, listen, I'm not calling these things bad. I'm just saying these things don't define what a church is. If a church doesn't have a nursery, if it doesn't have a kids program, if it doesn't have youth group, does that mean it's not a church? No, because those kids, if the nursery one day ceases to exist, we would still gather together and we'd put up with some crying and some tears because it'd be okay, because those kids are just as much the church as we are. And if they cry, that's all right. They're 3-4 years old, but they're still the church. And we wouldn't want to say, okay, you got to go sit outside because you can't be the church until you reach a certain age. No. So take away ministries, programs, all these things. Those don't define what a church is. The church is us in this gathering together. The church is not a Bible study. Okay, I've heard and the same people that say, I'm the church and so I don't have to go to church. Well, I've got this Bible study over here and I love my Bible study. That's great. Bible studies are wonderful. They're not the church. A Bible study is not a church. and it can be wonderful, and it can be edifying, and it can be beautiful, and I don't think you should stop it, but I still think you should find a church too. And it's not a product to be consumed. I know some of us felt this at different points. There was 4 years ago where church all of a sudden started feeling like a product, right? Where you're watching it on a screen, or you're watching it, or you come to church, but you have to sit 10 feet from somebody else, or it started feeling less and less like the church because it got turned into, in a lot of ways, a product to be consumed. And in some ways, it still turns into that. I talked with somebody recently who was like, man, I have been, one of my former youth group students who's just recently become an adult and is going out on their own and is kind of out of their parents' house, and he's been sending me clips of pastors that he's watching on Instagram. And I asked him, that's great, awesome. We got to talking, and I was like, so what's your local church like? He's like, oh, well, I haven't found one yet. It's like, okay, I didn't try one out this week. Because all the pastors on Instagram are awesome. They're great. They have some great clips to say, but they're not your pastor. They're not your congregation. They're not your people. You need to be with your people and around your people. And I love and I respect a lot of my brothers and sisters in the ministry who can post clips and I post some to our Instagram, right? I hope people watch them and are encouraged and edified by them. But if they're watching them in another country or in another state, I wouldn't say, hey, yeah, call me this week so we can have our pastoral No, go find your own church. Go find these things because you need a church. The church is not a product just to be consumed through your phone or your laptop. It's a place where we gather with the people who are the church. That's what the church is. So this is what the church is. And so now, how do we be ready? How do we be ready as the church? How are we ready? What does it mean to be ready? You can look with me at Matthew chapter 24, and I'm looking at verses 45 to 51. It says, "Who then is the faithful and the wise servant whom the master has put in charge of the servants of his household to give them their food at the proper time? It will be good for that servant whose master finds him doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, 'My master is staying away a long time,' and he then begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour when he is not aware of. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So how are we as a church supposed to be ready? One, if we're going to be ready, we need to be active. We need to be active as the church. We need to be moving and working. He says in this passage, "Who then is the faithful, wise servant whom the master has put in charge of his servants and gives them their food at the proper time? It will be good for this servant when the master finds him doing so when he comes." Being ready doesn't mean waiting till the opportunity is right. It means being active now. It means doing what we've been called to do and carrying it out. It means living that out right here and now. We need to have a balance between being prepared and being active in what we're doing. Jesus goes on later in this passage to tell the parable of the 10 virgins, which is a parable about young women who are waiting for the bridegroom to come for them. In Jewish tradition, it was tradition that the bride would wait for the bridegroom to come, and he would come and grab her, and then they would go off and they would be married. And so in this parable, he's talking about 10 women that are waiting for the bridegroom to come, and he says 5 of them have got their lantern and it's lit and they're ready for him to come, and they've got oil that's stored and prepared so that their lamps will never run out. And then you've got 5 other women who also have lamps that are burning and ready, but they didn't prepare with the extra oil to be ready to receive the bridegroom, and so at a certain point their lamps ran out. But the common thing amongst all those women is that they all had their lamps lit and ready to go. They all did the first step, at least. They were active. They were ready and able to do the things that God was calling them to do. And we need to be careful to balance being prepared and what we're doing for work. Because if we just work and work and never prepare ourselves for what is coming, and we're never prepared for those things, that leads to burnout. if all you're doing is just working and working and working and never sitting at the master's feet, and never, if you're always Martha and never Mary, then that leads to burnout. But if you're always just only focusing on yourself and only thinking about yourself and not thinking about, hey, what can I do for God, and how can I serve, and how can I be involved and be a part of these things, then that can lead to laziness and stagnation. And so we don't want to be lazy and stagnant either, so we need to be active in what God's called us to do. If we're going to be a church that reaches the lost and that restores the wanderer, we need to be active in what we are doing. We need to be active and ready for what God has called us to do. I was challenged by this just myself this week, because I asked you to pray for a man named Tom, who I met this week in the Friday email. If you read it there, it was I met Tom on Friday, and Tom he was a dad, just like we were similar age and had similar age kids, and just got to talking and just kind of connected over. We both love to play golf, and so we were talking about golf and some of those things, and he works for a finance company out in Wheaton, and we just got to chatting, and we were going our separate ways, and I got back in my car, and we were sitting in the parking lot, both leaving the same place, and I was sitting in my car, and I realized, like, I left this man, and we did all these things, and we connected, and I just felt this conviction in that moment, like, what are you doing right now? It's fine to go home and pray for Tom and pray that he knows Jesus. That's all well and good, but you've got a business card and you've got a gospel tract sitting right there in your car. So I jumped out. I was like, I'm tired of, I don't care if he thinks this is weird, or he can go home and throw these in the trash, whatever. But at least I was active. At least I did the right thing. So he had he was reversing out of his parking spot, and I'm just running over, hey, Tom, trying to stop him, but got up to his window, was just like, here, whatever you do with these, it's my number. If you ever, around the area, you want to play golf and get together, or here's that, if you want to come to church, and just left it with him. He was like, oh, okay. He definitely gave me a look like I was weird. Oh, okay, thanks. And he put it on the seat next to him, and it's like, all right, God, I don't know what you're going to do with Tom. I may never see Tom again, but I want to be active. I want to be a part of reaching the lost and restoring the wanderer and saying, at least I know. It's all great to have a heart for Tom and to be like, great, I'm going to pray for him and do all these things, but I want to be active too. And whatever happens with that, that's up to the Lord, and it's in his hands now. But I can know that, okay, God, I was trying to be active and being ready for what you were calling me to do. So the second thing, of course, along with that, I've been talking about it, being active also means being prepared. It says it will be good for the servant who finds the master doing so when he returns. In this story, there's two scenarios for what the servant is doing when the master comes back. One, he's doing what he's supposed to do. He's prepared. He's feeding the servants. He's taking care of his responsibilities. He's doing what the master asked him to do. The other is that he says to himself, well, I don't know when the master's coming back. He didn't give me a time, so you know what? I can get prepared when I'm supposed to be prepared. There's a thing that I think a lot of us can be easy to do, and it is easy to do, is like, I can take care of that tomorrow, or I can do that tomorrow. I've been surprised. I've had a couple people say to me, one recently at a funeral, who said to me, what you said about Jesus, that really, I think that's true. I believe that. But I think I can always take care of that at another time. I'm not ready for it right now. But I think when I do get ready and when I can take care of it, then I will. And that's a scary place to be and a scary thing to think. Because that's what this servant thinks. Oh, I can go and get drunk with my friends. I can go and neglect my responsibilities because he's not here right now. He's not coming home today. But then today becomes tomorrow, and it becomes a week, and it becomes 2 weeks, and it becomes 3 weeks. And all of a sudden, before you realize it, the master's back and you're not ready. Master's back and the house is a mess and the servants aren't fed and things aren't taken care of. And then you're standing there and there's consequences for those things. And I don't want to be like one of the 5 virgins who was caught with no oil in her lamp. I don't want to be the servant who was caught when not ready for when his master was coming back. And I don't want us to be a church that's not active and prepared in what we're doing for the kingdom. Because there will be a time, either, I'm not just talking about the future reality, which is true, that Jesus will come back and say, what have I been doing with the time that I was given? Or that God, I'm hearing the testimony, like it was so perfect. The testimony of Chris and Andrea is so perfect at Defiance College. They were ready for when those 40 students showed up because they had 2 young men and women who were laying the groundwork, who were doing the work behind the scenes, who were preparing, who were praying, who were hopefully seeking what God had them to do. And then when that time came and people started showing up, they weren't just like, oh shoot, what do we do now? No, they were ready for that. And I don't want to be a church that's not ready for when, if, and hopefully with expectancy that maybe God starts to bring 1, 2, 3, 4 people, 5, 6, 7, that were ready to talk about Jesus, to help them grow in their walks with the Lord, to help them see Jesus and experience his joy and grace in their lives. So we need to be active and we need to be prepared. And the last thing that it means to be ready is it also means to be expectant. The master of the servant will come on a day when he does not expect him and at an hour when he is not aware of. It's what we're talking about with when Jesus comes back or when the time comes that God has given us. We don't know. But I want to be expectant. I want to live expecting that Jesus is going to come back. And I've heard a lot of talk. I mean, there is, it's not, we don't know. I heard a song on Christian radio the other day as I was coming. I don't know who the artist is, so forgive me, but it literally, the chorus was just saying, Jesus is coming back soon. And I was just was repeating, he is. The early church thought Jesus was, they were lived with that expectancy, that Jesus, some of them were expecting, doesn't mean that they were unbiblical or wrong, but they lived with expectancy that Jesus may come back in their time. That was 2,000 years ago. So I'm not saying he is. It could be 1,000 years after I die that Jesus comes back. But I want to live expecting that could be while I'm here on this earth. That we're a church that lives like we're expecting Jesus to come back. That we live with that urgency and that push in our lives to say Jesus could come back. And what is he going to find me doing when he does? What can I be doing for the good of God and his kingdom as an expectant follower of Jesus Christ? And so if there's practical things for us, anything that we can take away, things that we can do with this week, if there's an action to take, be a person or a family that values the church. To be a ready church, be a family that values the church. That when you're able to and available, be at church. And I know this is not a plug for the things that I do in throughout the week or our email or anything like that, but I try to send every week to us as a congregation. This is the passage we're going to be preaching about, so you can read it ahead of time. Here's what we're going to be talking about. Here's things you can pray for. Here's things, prepare for church before you arrive, and then be present and engaged when you're at church and get involved where you can. That's what it means to be ready. To come to church, not just to say I'm here to attend because this is what I'm supposed to do, but I'm ready. I'm ready to encourage. God, you have me to encourage somebody this morning or pray for somebody this morning? Great, I'm ready to do that. God, you're ready for my heart to be transformed by your word this morning? I'm ready to do that. God, you're ready for me just to worship and lift my hands up high and sing with everything that I have because you're worthy of my worship? I'm ready to do that. And then make sure that you're involved and plugged in and serving where you can. If there's a prayer to pray, Lord, help us to do all that we can to be a ready church. Help me to love the church with all its flaws and with all of its flawed people. Help me to trust in your plan and purpose. And then if there's a praise to repeat, God, thank you for the church. Thank you for the community of love and fellowship I've received in this place. Thank you for my Pathway family that encourages me and points me to Jesus. Continue to knit us closer together. And that's an encouragement I want to leave you with, because that's I can't speak for all of you in this building, but that's why I know it's like, Sam, it's your job, you're being paid to be here. True, I can't deny that, all right? But I also love coming here on Sundays. And I love coming to prayer meeting on the Wednesdays that we have it. And I love going to our small group. And I have loved doing the men's breakfast recently. And you know what? I'm so thankful because I saw that in the eyes of my wife the other day, coming back from the women's breakfast. And I know, and I see that in some of you, that this is a place, and I want to encourage us in that, to continue on and forward in that this is a place that encourages me and points me to Jesus, not as the pastor of this church, just as Sam Speck, the believer, just as Sam Speck, the follower of Jesus. You are a place that encourages me to love Jesus and follow him more. And I want to continue to do that, all of us together. I want this to be a place that encourages us to be ready and to love and follow Jesus more.